The wind carried a sharp chill as I approached the Brenwalter estate. Shadows stretched long and twisted across the overgrown path, the moon casting an eerie glow on the towering gates. They creaked open with a sound that felt too loud for the silence surrounding me. I hesitated before stepping inside. Coming back here wasn't part of the plan, but the past has a strange way of pulling you into its depths when you least expect it. The house loomed ahead, its decayed exterior speaking of years abandoned. This was once my father's pride, a place built on promises of a better life, of invention and innovation. Now it was a skeleton, much like his legacy. My chest tightened as I moved closer, memories of his eccentricity and failures rushing back. "You'll finish what I started, John," he used to say. His voice still lingered, even though he was gone. Inside, the air was heavy with dampness, the wooden floor groaning under my weight. My steps echoed faintly, though I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. A faint clicking sound caught my attention, a familiar, rhythmic pattern. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was the sound of his mechanical invention, the one he claimed could extract secrets from silence. The machine was nowhere to be seen, but its presence was undeniable. "Hello," my voice came out steadier than I felt. No answer, just the faint hum of something deeper within the house. I wasn't sure if I was here to uncover the truth about my father or to escape the weight of his shadow. Either way, I knew one thing: leaving this place would be far more difficult than entering it. The house smelled of rot and neglect, but beneath that was something else, an acrid undertone that tickled the back of my throat. I pushed forward, the floor sagging slightly under my weight, each creak reminding me of how precarious this structure was. Every room I entered felt like a snapshot of the past, frozen in decay. The study was the worst. Papers lay scattered across the desk, curling with age, while the once gleaming brass fixtures of his machines were dulled and rusted. It was a workshop for a mind that never rested, a place where my father spun his dreams of control and understanding. As a child, I admired him. He was brilliant, driven, and always thinking one step ahead of everyone else. But as I grew older, admiration turned to unease. His ideas were relentless, his gaze distant. Conversations with him always ended in riddles or demands. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing," he once told me, his voice tinged with both warning and pride. "But danger is where discovery lies." I ran my fingers over one of the dusty blueprints pinned to the wall. It depicted a humanoid figure, segmented and mechanical, with annotations scrawled in his jagged handwriting. The design was incomplete, jagged lines abruptly ending, as though abandoned mid-thought. A faint tapping broke my reverie. At first, I thought it was the house settling, but the rhythm was too deliberate. 3 sharp raps. A pause. 3 more. It was coming from upstairs. I clenched my fists, my pulse quickening. This place shouldn't have anyone else in it. I had made sure of that. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it started. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice echoing back at me. The silence was deafening, thick enough to smother any rational thoughts. Still, I moved toward the staircase, the old wood bowing under each step. As I ascended, I glanced at the wall to my right. Family portraits hung in a perfect line, but one of them caught my eye. It was of me, my father, and my mother. Her face, once warm and full of life, was now faded beyond recognition. Only the faint outline of her smile remained, yet her eyes seemed sharper than I remembered, as though they were watching me. I reached the landing, my breathing shallow. The hallway stretched out before me, its wallpaper peeling, revealing splinters of wood beneath. At the end of it, a door I didn't recognize stood ajar, light spilling from its edges. This house had secrets. My father had secrets, and I was beginning to realize that coming back here meant confronting both. The door at the end of the hallway beckoned like a predator waiting for its prey. Its faint light illuminated a path through the gloom, an unspoken invitation I wasn't sure I wanted to accept. But I couldn't turn back now. As I approached, a strange sensation crept over me, a tingling at the base of my neck, like cold fingers grazing my skin. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air grew warmer, almost humid, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to my tongue. The door creaked as I nudged it open with trembling fingers, revealing a room I had never seen before. It was small and windowless, its walls covered in intricate carvings, symbols, and runes etched with precision. At the center of the room stood a table, and on it rested a book. The book was massive, bound in cracked leather, its surface marred by deep scratches. A heavy chain wrapped around it, securing the cover with an iron padlock. But what held my attention was the faint hum emanating from it, a vibration that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. My father's voice echoed in my memory. Some things aren't meant to be opened. No matter how tempting they seem, I shouldn't have reached for it. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my hand moved on its own, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the chain. The hum grew louder, resonating through my skull, drowning out every thought, except one: open it. A sudden noise snapped me out of the trance. A shuffle, barely audible, came from behind me. I turned sharply, my breath caught in my throat. The hallway was empty, its shadows still. But I wasn't alone. I felt it, a presence, heavy and oppressive, watching, waiting. Who's there? My voice trembled as the words left my lips. The shadows in the hallway shifted, curling unnaturally as though they were alive. From their depths, a faint outline began to form, too tall, too distorted to be human. Its movements were jagged, wrong, like a puppet with its strings tangled. The figure didn't move closer, but its gaze, if it even had eyes, was fixed on me. My limbs felt rooted to the floor, every fiber of my being screaming to run. But the book behind me seemed to call out, its hum now a deafening roar. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, my father's voice whispered in my mind again. I had a choice: flee and leave this place behind forever, or confront whatever this was and finally uncover the truth my father buried here. The shadows edged closer, their silence more terrifying than any sound. And still the hum beckoned. The figure dissolved into the shadows before it could fully take shape, but its presence lingered like a sickness in the air. My knees buckled, and I leaned against the doorway for support, struggling to steady my breathing. Something had changed. An unshakable feeling of being watched followed me now, like invisible hands brushing against my back every time I moved. The carvings on the walls caught my eye again. They weren't just symbols. They were instructions. The markings depicted the book at the center of various grotesque rituals. Figures, crudely drawn but unmistakably human, were shown kneeling, bound, and offering blood. Their faces twisted in agony as shadows loomed over them. The carvings spoke of something ancient, something that had been here long before my family. A name, scratched deep into the wood in uneven letters, stood out. Azra. I said the word aloud before I realized it. The hum from the book surged violently, the air in the room thickening. The chain rattled, and the padlock jerked as if struggling against an unseen force. The carvings seemed to shimmer, the crude figures now appearing to writhe and shift, their agony becoming disturbingly lifelike. Then, a whisper. It wasn't in my head, it was here, in the room. I turned sharply, expecting to see the figure again, but there was nothing. Only the book, pulsing like a beating heart. The whisper grew louder, joined by others, until it became a cacophony of voices. They overlapped, some screaming, others pleading, but one stood out, a child's voice, soft and tremulous. "Daddy," the words stopped my heart. I spun around, nearly tripping over my feet. The hallway outside the room was now shrouded in fog, thick and impenetrable. From within it, the faint outline of a small figure emerged, a child. Her hair hung in tangled strands over her face, her frame frail and swaying unnaturally, as though a puppet was pulling her strings. I took a step forward instinctively, but the voices swelled, deafening, and I froze. "Stay back," I choked out, my voice cracking. The child tilted her head. Her hair parted slightly, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to stretch into endless black voids. She opened her mouth, and a guttural, inhuman screech filled the space. The fog surged forward, engulfing me. My vision swam as unseen hands pulled me backward, away from the doorway and toward the center of the room. The door slammed shut on its own, the walls trembling as if alive. The voices subsided, leaving only the hum of the book and my own ragged breathing. I was trapped. And then I saw it on the back cover of the book, scratched deep into the leather. "The sins of the bloodline demand reckoning." The fog in the room thickened, and the weight of it pressed on my chest, suffocating. My mind raced, struggling to make sense of the madness unfolding around me. I reached out instinctively for the book, my fingers trembling, but a strange force pulled it out of my grasp before I could touch it. The pulse of energy, cold and violent, shocked my system, and I staggered backward, crashing into the bookshelf behind me. The room felt as though it were collapsing inward. The walls seemed to bend and stretch, warping into impossible shapes, their surfaces growing slick and pulsating like living flesh. The whispering voices came again, louder this time, clearer. "Azrua is coming." I didn't understand. Who or what was Azrua? The name felt wrong, like it had been etched into my brain by something other than my own thoughts. Then I saw it, the figure in the doorway again, now fully formed, its shadow stretching impossibly long. It wasn't just watching me anymore. It was standing in the doorway, its eyes locking onto mine with a predatory hunger. I could barely make out its features, too distorted to be human, but there was something familiar about it, like an echo of someone I once knew. The face twisted in a grotesque grin, and I knew, without a doubt, that it wasn't just a nightmare. It was real. In an instant, it was in front of me. The temperature in the room plummeted, my breath turning to mist in the air. Its hand, long, skeletal, and covered in blackened veins, reached out, grazing my face. Pain shot through my skull, as though my very mind were being torn apart. I stumbled backward, hands clutching my head, but the figure remained. Its lips moved, and words spilled out like venom. "You have been chosen." The room seemed to bend again, the floor tilting beneath me. My head spun as if the ground itself were unraveling. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The shadows consumed the figure's form, twisting and contorting like a nightmare taking shape. Suddenly, everything stopped. The figure disappeared, leaving only the book behind. The hum, now deafening, grew to a crescendo, and I felt the pull irresistible. I had to open it. I had no choice. I woke up on the floor, my back aching, hands gripping the cold wood beneath me. The room was silent, eerily silent. No hum, no whispers. It was as if nothing had ever happened, yet everything had changed. The book lay open in front of me, its pages torn and stained with something that resembled ink, but darker, almost black. I could still feel the pulse of the energy, a faint tremor in the pit of my stomach, but it was barely there now, like a lingering aftershock. I hesitated, staring at the book, unsure of what I had just experienced. Was it real? I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had shifted. I stood up, legs unsteady, and moved toward the door. As I reached for the handle, the air seemed to change again. The oppressive weight returned, heavier than before. Azrua, the name slipped from my lips involuntarily, the word foreign yet familiar, as if it had been inside me all along. I hadn't wanted to say it, hadn't even wanted to think it, but it felt like an instinct, something deep within me pulling it to the surface. Suddenly, the door swung open by itself, the hinges creaking loudly, but there was no breeze, no wind, nothing. The room was no longer the same. My apartment, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien. The walls were lined with dark, shifting shapes, and the faint scent of something rotten lingered in the air. A chill ran down my spine, but I couldn't tell if it was fear or something more. I stepped out into the hall, and that's when I saw it across from me, at the far end of the corridor, a shadow standing just out of reach of the light, the shape of a person, though not quite human. It moved with jerky, unnatural motions, its face hidden in the darkness. It was watching me. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat tightened. I backed away, my feet stumbling, but then I saw it again. There was another one, closer now. The shadows had come for me. I couldn't escape. I didn't scream again. The fear was too thick in my throat, choking the sound before it could escape. My feet frozen, wouldn't carry me away from the hallway. Instead, I stood there, trembling, staring at the two figures now standing motionless in the shadows. I couldn't see their faces, but I felt their eyes cold, unblinking, watching every breath I took. It was like they were waiting for something I couldn't quite understand. But I had to move. I had to make a choice, because standing still wouldn't save me. I didn't know what I was doing when I stepped forward. There was no plan. I couldn't think clearly, my mind racing with thoughts that didn't make sense, fragments of things I couldn't remember. But I knew one thing, I couldn't let them take me. I reached out, my fingers brushing the wall beside me, as if that small touch might ground me, might pull me back into myself. For a second, the air seemed to thicken, and the walls seemed to close in until something inside me snapped. I didn't have to run. I didn't have to hide. I just had to face it. I didn't know how I knew, but I understood. This thing, whatever it was, didn't have control over me unless I let it. I had to make a stand. The book, still in my hand, pulsed again, a soft rhythm like a heartbeat. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, and whispered the name Azrua. The darkness recoiled. The figures, those shadows, twitched, but they didn't move toward me. Instead, they seemed to shrink back, like something invisible had pushed them away. I kept my voice steady, despite the tightness in my chest, and said it again. Azrua, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the hallway was empty. The oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by the dull light of the hallway lamps. The air no longer felt suffocating. I was alone. I exhaled, the weight on my chest lifting, but I wasn't foolish enough to think it was over. I had done something that had pushed back the shadows. But it wasn't gone. I knew that. It had only been delayed. The quiet after the tension felt like a brief respite, but I couldn't afford to relax. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. The air seemed clearer, but I knew the danger wasn't gone. I had only pushed it back. This was far from over. I needed answers. I walked through the house, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. Each room was just a little too still, too silent. Even the familiar shadows felt wrong now, and the walls seemed to close in on me in ways that didn't make sense. The book was still in my hand, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it held the key. Whatever this thing was, Azrua, I had to learn more. but I didn't know where to start. I went back to the library. The place felt colder than before, the air pressing against my skin. The bookcase in the corner seemed to mock me now, the shelves stacked with books I hadn't dared touch until now. I pulled a few down at random. They were filled with old text, things that shouldn't have existed in this house, things that had no place here. The pages crackled under my fingers, ancient and heavy with knowledge that I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But I had to. There were notes in the margins, scribbled words, phrases I couldn't read at first. The language was strange, foreign. But the more I stared, the more the shapes seemed familiar. One name kept appearing, Azrua. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding as I found a passage in English. Azrua is not a name to be spoken lightly. It is the bringer of silence, the master of all that hides in the dark. Those who call its name must be prepared to face the truths that will break the mind and the soul. I shuddered. This wasn't something I could just wish away. The truth was here, and it wasn't going to wait for me to catch up. I turned the page, desperately searching for more, but I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Whatever was coming, whatever was pulling me toward this was going to happen soon. The shadows were gathering again. The air grew thick with a palpable sense of inevitability. My hands trembled as I gripped the book, its pages now stained with my sweat. I had to face it. Whatever Azrua was, whatever it had become, I had to confront it. There would be no more running. I heard it then, something faint at first, like a whisper in the dark, a sound I couldn't quite place. But it wasn't just a sound. It was a presence. Turning sharply, I scanned the room. The library was dark, but not in the way it had been before. There was something else in it now, something alive. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. They had form. I felt the weight of its gaze before I saw it, a hulking figure standing in the corner, its shape slowly solidifying. It was massive, towering over me with an aura of suffocating dread. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed faintly with a malice that was far older than this house, older than anything I could comprehend. Azrua. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat. The entity in front of me was too much, too real, too overwhelming. My mind couldn't process it. It didn't move at first. It just stood there, watching me. I had no idea what it wanted, only that it had come for me, and I had no way of stopping it. I could feel its presence pressing against me, invading every corner of my mind. It was like a weight on my chest, a hand around my throat. It was suffocating, relentless. And then I heard it, soft at first, but growing louder. A voice. Do you want to understand? I froze. The voice wasn't human, but it was inside my head. It wasn't just speaking to me, it was feeding on me. Everything you've ever known is a lie. This is the truth, and you will know it. The room seemed to shift around me, the walls warping and bending. The ground beneath me trembled. I couldn't breathe. My mind was splitting. The weight of its words, the weight of everything, was too much. I reached for the book again, clinging to it like a lifeline. But the pages turned of their own accord. Words I couldn't read flashed across the paper, symbols, runes, a language lost to time. My eyes stung as they tried to make sense of it. And then the world broke. The world around me snapped back into place, but it wasn't the same. It felt empty. The figure was gone. The library was still, but only on the surface. In the depths, in the parts of the room I couldn't quite see, something still moved. I could feel it. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. The room hadn't changed. The air was still thick, suffocating, but it wasn't the same. I wasn't alone anymore. Whatever Azrua had been, whatever it was becoming, was still with me. The book lay open on the floor, its pages frozen in place. I couldn't read it anymore. The words had shifted, changed, become something I couldn't understand. Something that wasn't meant to be understood. But I knew that I hadn't truly escaped. Not really. I thought of the figure, of its eyes, of its presence. It wasn't just in the house, it was in me now, in my thoughts, in my bones. It was waiting, and it would never let go. I had learned too much, seen too much. The truth was here with me now, haunting me, even if I tried to ignore it. The house was silent, but in that silence, I could hear it. The whisper, "You'll know more soon," and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was coming next, I wasn't prepared for it. Days passed, but the sensation never left. I thought I had time to forget, to breathe, but the weight of it was always there, lurking in the corners of my mind. The whispers, the feeling that Azra was still watching, waiting. I couldn't go back to the normal life I had before. The world felt wrong now, like it was made of brittle glass, just waiting for something to shatter it. No matter where I went, there was always a shadow, always that sense of eyes on me, in places I could never quite place. I moved out of that town, changed my name, changed my face, but there are no real escapes. Not from her, from it. The book is gone, lost in the shuffle of my desperate attempts to leave it behind. But I know it knows where I am. I hear it in the creak of the floorboards. I see it in the flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. And sometimes, when I wake up in the dead of night, the whispers call to me again, reminding me of what I saw, what I felt, what I still don't understand. I try to ignore it, but I can't. Not anymore. The truth has me now, and it's only a matter of time before it comes to collect.